11 o'clock, so we are going to get going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on non-coal mining and ground stability in collaboration with Conveyancing Data Services. My name is Danielle or Danny, and thanks for joining me today. Just as always, the housekeeping before we get going, you should see a control panel on your screen which allows you to ask written questions. Please feel free to submit these as we go along, and we'll try and get these answered either during or after the webinar. We are recording today's session, so if you'd like a copy of the recording to share with any colleagues or a copy of the slides, again, please feel free to let me know, and we will get that over to you after today's session. And as always, we love your feedback. We find it absolutely invaluable. So if you could take a few seconds to answer and give us feedback at the end of the session, we'd really, really appreciate it. So let's get going. So coal and ground instability seems to be one of the lesser known risks, or probably, in terms of concern for at least the end consumer, it's certainly not something people tend to be as concerned about. Amongst consumers and the conveyancing profession. Now, the majority of firms these days will always provide an environmental search to ensure that they cover the Law Society guidance on contaminated land and flood. And of course, you order a Con 29M where one is required. So why does non-coal and other types of ground stability go underreported? I think a lot of it's to do with, public awareness. I don't know if I'm sure you've all read the Conveyancing Handbook from cover to cover, but even though there isn't an official practice note in there, there is a whole section on mineral extraction and ground stability in the Conveyancing Handbook, which, it's not exactly super exciting reading, but it is in there to provide you with guidance. And it does state that a property should be searched to identify whether further investigation of site-specific ground instability risks is required, which is of course where we can assist you with some of our very incredibly comprehensive non-coal mining and mining reports in general. So, and the second point of the Conveyancing Handbook states that if risks are likely to occur, obtain a site-specific report from a commercial search company, which of course, this is where we can help if you think it's right for you and your client. Now, it is stated in the Con 29M, Law Society Guidance Notes 2018, that the Con 29M report relates only to coal, but that the inquirer should make inquiries regarding other minerals to the appropriate sources of information in certain areas where these minerals are known to exist or have been worked, and that some report producers will provide this additional information. So again, other types of mining, certainly more prevalent in certain parts of the country. So generally in the Southwest, they're a lot more familiar with things like tin or copper mining, and then in certain parts of the Northeast and the Northwest, there are other types of mining as well, which people are a lot more aware of. And so it's just being able to understand what the risk is to the more uncommon types of mining outside of coal. So let's talk about risk. I'm going to show you a couple of maps which will show you the various mining risks that are both coal and non-coal all across the country. So we're going to start with the smallest. So this map shows the gray area, which you can see a little gray splodge, and that's the Cheshire Brine Compensation District, which, as you can see, it covers a very, very small area and affects a very small part of the country in the grand scheme of things. So for those who do fall in the Cheshire Brine area, you're going to be very much aware that you're going to need to get a Cheshire Brine or a Cheshire Salt search if you have a client that happens to fall within that area. Next, again, this mustard yellow is the coal field. So of course, everybody is very, very much aware that you have to buy a Con 29M if you fall into that coal field. It covers more than 11,000 square miles of England and Wales. So it affects certain parts of the country. And again, most people will be aware of it if you happen to be in and around a coal area. Now, this third image laid on top, which is the green bit, that's the non-coal area. So it affects a pretty significant part of the country. Now, it's been estimated that around 56% of properties are potentially affected by other mining and ground stability issues. However, this doesn't mean that you're going to need a report every single time. And from analyzing our data, which has been refined to ensure we only identify a risk when there truly is one, it indicates that 22% of properties in England and Wales and Scotland will need a non-coal report. 39% of properties will need both a non-coal and a coal report, and 40% of properties will need all three, so non-coal, coal, and a Cheshire salt search. So one thing also to think about is for any non-coal issues, the liability really falls to the homeowner. Unlike Cheshire Brine or even coal, you have a coal board or a Cheshire Brine board to go to make things right. For anything that falls outside of it, that there is no recourse for claiming, as there is with Cheshire Brine and coal. So just something to bear in mind, and I think it's certainly why this is growing in terms of awareness. Now on the screen, you'll see a table of all the materials which have been mined throughout the country. There's 60 different minerals that's been mined, quarried, extracted all over the country, and they fall into 5 different categories. So to ensure we have a full and accurate picture of mining risk, we of course cover all 5 of these categories, leaving no gaps. So you've got metals or metalliferous, traditionally thought to be confined to the southwest. We're also actually extensively mined in regions such as the Peak District, North Wales, Somerset, and Cumbria. You've got stone mining, so this includes things like clay or ball clay or china clay, as some of you might know it, in certain areas of the country. Historically, this represents the most extensive exploitation of mineral resources in the UK. It also includes things like limestone or bathstone and chalk, and some of that mining activity still continues for these types of minerals today as well. You've got evaporites, most commonly known as brine and gypsum. Brine has been extracted as a solution from several areas of England, including Cheshire, Staffordshire, Lancashire, not so much the southwest. This category also includes rock salt, alabaster, and potash. And then, of course, you've got coal mining, which I mentioned earlier, covers 11,000 square miles of England and Wales. There are over 170,000 coal mine entries known in the UK. However, only 1 in 3 are recorded within mine plans and maps. So there are actually a fair amount out there that are potentially unrecorded. And then finally, you've got hydrocarbons. So this is to do with extracting oil and gas, dating back to around the 17th century. You've got areas in Dorset that have a fair amount of that, although it wasn't really until the 1800s when oil and gas was extracted commercially and used to light the streets. However, since then, there are about 2,200 oil and gas wells that have been drilled onshore. So we look at all of these things and not just coal. And of course, we report on these types of risks. So it's worth just remembering, that we cover all 60 of these minerals. So here I thought I'd show you some examples of some pretty extreme examples of where non-coal shafts have opened. So you've got the first 2 images. So the first one on the left is on the 14th of March. This was from 2016, which is a 90-meter deep mine shaft, which opened, destroying the patio and half a garage of a bungalow in Cornwall. The shaft opened up during a site investigation, and our teams at Mining Searches UK were then called for further investigative works, and discovered not only the shaft, but a long tunnel coming off of it, indicative of extensive mining in this area. Thankfully, the property that this was on was actually unoccupied. The image on the right, this is Beacon near Camborne in Cornwall. So again, our team were initially called out by a concerned homeowner to observe a small subsidence event near a tree in their garden. And after the initial visit, we were contacted again to inform us that the subsidence had increased by a significant amount. And basically, we were prepared to carry out the investigative works in the garden. So some pretty big extreme images. This image that's popped up, that's in St. Albans. It's a pretty famous picture, I think, and that's really linked to a chalk mine collapse. And then you've got Cedarwood Drive, also in St. Albans, so likely to be another chalk associated collapse. You've got things like coastal erosion. So this was in the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, only last year. And finally, this is coastal erosion in Hemsby. So it is worth thinking, I've talked about non-coal mining, but also other types of ground instability, coastal erosion, not natural ground instability. All of these things are things to think about because they can and will impact properties in certain cases, and a lot of it is to do with geology and whatnot. I thought it would be interesting to show you some more recent casework that our team have done. So this is a case study in Carbis Bay. So this is really to show you the importance of having a search that covers all aspects of ground stability, including things like historical mining activity. Some of you might recognize this. This is the Carbis Bay Hotel, which hosted the G7 summit earlier this year in June. So as I'm going to show you in the next few slides, based on our extensive archives, our proprietary data, and our investigation information, this is what some of our searches would turn up and highlight some interesting results for the actual area. So here you can see our historical maps for the given area and the property which we use in our reports. So we use Ordnance Survey maps, the first dating back to the 1800s, to build up a picture of the historical terrain of an area. As you can see, the map from the right-hand side is dated 1887, and the area of Carbis Bay, formerly known as, oh God, apologies for any listeners, I'm going to probably mess this up, Barepta Cove, looked very, very different. Records indicate that the mining was well established in this area as the 1520s and likely occurred on a small scale well before this. Now, highlighted in red are just some of the clues of the former industrial activity, mine shafts and engine houses. So really, really interesting. You can see that we've used this, and you can see there's multiple sources of mining activity dotted all over the place. Now, the historical maps only show us the tip of the iceberg, recording only what was visible at the surface at the time of the survey. Now, to really understand the risk posed from historical mining, we also need to consider what's occurred underground. Now, one way to do this is by compiling the historical mine plans created when the mine was abandoned. So these show the extent of the underground tunnels and excavations visible as the black lines on the plan. In addition, many more shafts are shown as red circles on the map. So you can start to get an idea of the non-coal risk which may be identified within our reports, and hopefully this is what demonstrates the extent of some of the mining in this area. So yeah, the map's starting to look pretty busy at this point. And once we've gathered all the recorded information, we then need to start to consider the risks which may not have been recorded. So as I said earlier, mining was well established in this area from the 1520s. However, mining records and ordnance surveys didn't actually start until the mid-1800s. So this leaves us with a significant time gap where mining has occurred, but there has been no record. And as you can see from the plan, it's now looking a lot busier. Compilation of the available records along with understanding of local geology allows us to build up an accurate interpretation of risk areas. This includes areas where historical mining may have occurred, but there is no record of that. And these types of high risk areas are clearly highlighted within our searches. So this is the same for non-coal mining in Cornwall, but also across the whole country. So really, really fascinating and really, really interesting to see how much we've actually mined certain parts of the country. And also, here's an example of some recent site work we undertook following a search result that was action required that was ordered from us. So a new house was to be constructed on a previously underdeveloped parcel of land. Now, during our site investigations, a very shallow, narrow tunnel was found, and the images show the trench breaking through the roof of the tunnel and the tunnel itself. The bottom image shows a curtain of tree roots which had broken through the roof of the tunnel, giving you an idea of how close to the surface it actually was. This tunnel was previously completely unrecorded, with there being no evidence of it previously at the surface. However, our data and our report identified such a risk at an early stage that it allowed the appropriate action to be taken, and it actually enabled the house to be constructed. So it is good to know about this stuff ahead of time, particularly if you're looking at redevelopment of some description. I imagine this gave the security of the G7 summit a very particular type of security concern, which they probably hadn't even thought of or come across before, because this was very, very close to that hotel. But it just goes to show that, there's a lot of stuff out there that's unrecorded, which is why it's always good to keep these types of risks in mind. Now, I know we've talked a lot about man-made ground instability issues like non-coal mining, but I think it's worth remembering that ground stability issues can be brought on by natural causes as well. So it's important to not overlook that, which is why we look at the risk from both natural and non-natural ground instability concerns. So I'm going to digress and go a bit off-piste here. My partner's sister is an architect, and she was actually explaining to me that one of her clients has a house built in a high clay area, which means it can be susceptible to a lot of ground movement, particularly during wet and dry weather. So they found a small crack in the structure. It was 11 millimeters above ground. So that's just over a centimeter, which, let's say, certainly for me, from a non-architect's point of view, and certainly a layperson's point of view, could seem very, very minor. But actually, she explained to me that it was a serious concern, because there was evidence not just of sinking ground movement, but of heave, where the structure was being pushed upwards into itself, an upward movement that is typically associated with a swelling of clay soil when it's wet. And that is a very big concern. And, that is just one example of natural ground instability risks that can impact properties. And in this particular case that, my partner's sister was looking at, they were having to monitor the house for that ground movement before they could figure out what to do. So, it really does come from all sorts of sources, not just mining. Now we're going to have a look at a few other types of natural ground stability risks. So the photo that you see on the screen, pretty scary, is the Holbeck landslide south of Scarborough in North Yorkshire, which attracted considerable interest when it destroyed the 4-star Holbeck Hull Hotel, this is back in the early 90s. Now, the likely cause of the landslide was a combination of rainfall of 140 millimeters in the 2 months before the slide took place, issues related to the drainage of the slope, poor water pressure buildup in the slope, and the geology. And the first signs of movement on the cliff were seen 6 weeks before the main failure, when cracks developed in the tarmac surface of footpaths running across the cliffs. These were filled to stop the ingress of water to the cliff, but when the cracks reopened shortly before the main failure, the council closed the cliff paths below the hotel. At this time, a small part of the hotel garden was also observed to be suffering a minor movement. When Scarborough Holbeck Hotel fell into the sea in the early 90s, questions arose as to whether coastal erosion had caused this, although it turned out to be due to a mudslip caused by rainfall just 13 miles down the coast. Is an area that remains one of the most at risk of coastal erosion. So this area is close to Filey, which is the YO14 postcode. And just to give you an idea, the average property price, at least back then, was about $179,000 for 6,417 houses there. You'd pay an average home insurance premium of just under 60 quid. Here's how far into the land the coast is actually set to erode. So closest to the coast here are mostly caravan parks, as well as some holiday cottages and houses. If coastal erosion were to reach any residences, there would be the areas, these would be the areas that could see it first. So the average rebuild cost for houses in that postcode is roughly £186,000. It just gives you an idea, particularly with coastal erosion, and particularly if you are in that area, it can affect certain insurance premiums as well. But you're looking at up to 20 years of 40 meters, up to 50 years, 100 meters, or up to 100 years of 200 meters. I'll talk a little bit more about coastal erosion in the next couple of slides. But again, if you do have clients looking in a coastal area, coastal erosion is certainly one to think about. This is a really, really clever demonstration of how coastal erosion actually affects us. So this was actually, we found this story on YouTube. Cove Hive is a small village in East Suffolk. It's located on the North Sea coast between more well-known towns of Lowestoft and Southwold. Now, everyone says a picture paints 1,000 words, and in the case of Cove Hive, it really does. Mapping suggests that the coastline here has retreated around 530 meters since 1883. And the following images that you see that are kind of replaying themselves over the screen are taken from the Groundsure GIS system, showing the current coastline Ordnance Survey mapping overlaid with historical Ordnance Survey maps and the Environment Agency's National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping, which of course tells the story. In 1883, the Cove Hive's cliffs were well out to sea. By 1903, the cliffs had eroded approximately 75 meters. A further 80 meters had been eroded by 1927, which also saw the loss of the lookout house. Only 20 years later, a total of 250 meters had been lost to sea. And fast forward a few more decades to 1981, we see the unfortunate loss of yet another building, and this time it was the Coast Guard station. Between 1981 and today, around a further 175 meters had eroded away. And this is pretty much set to continue. Now, whilst Cove Hive may only be a small village tucked away in East Suffolk, it tells a pretty extreme tale of how weather patterns are eating away at our coastline and impacting upon the lives of many. And based on the Environment Agency's National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping, it's estimated that within 50 to 100 years, a further 800 meters of the Cove Hive coast will be lost, including the 400-year-old St. Andrew's Church, part of the Banneker National Nature Reserve, as well as virtually every single building left in the village. And the area impact also stretches south to the Dean's Beach at Southwold and north to Kingsland Beach. Now, whilst this doesn't help the current residents of the village, hopefully it helps future purchasers of property in coastal areas. When transacting any property, correct due diligence, of course, as you know, should be undertaken. So we just want to make sure that your clients are aware of these types of risks, particularly in coastal areas, because it is definitely a problem that's not going to go away. Now, Groundsure reports utilize and visualize the latest National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping, say that 10 times, from the Environment Agency and National Resources Wales to show exactly which areas will be at risk in both the scenario where local coastal defenses are funded and maintained, and additionally if defenses were not present or unfunded and abandoned. So that scenario is known as no active intervention. Now, the National Coastal Erosion Risk Management includes lengths of coast with consistent characteristics based on the cliff behavior characteristics and the defense characteristics. So even assuming that government spending on coastal defenses is maintained in perpetuity, we still see the likelihood of around 750 properties being lost to the sea in short term. So when we say short term, means the next 20 years. A further 2,000 properties in the medium term, which is 20 to 50 years, and an additional 5,700 in the long term, which is over 50 years. So if investment isn't maintained through lack of available funds or political will, then these figures could rise to over 80,000 properties disappearing in the long term. The NCERM shows potential erosion extents from the coastal baseline for those 3 time periods and 2 degrees of likelihood. So you've got 95%, 50%, and 5%. Therefore, if you have a property that's been identified in a long term with a 50% confidence level, this equates to there being a 50% chance the property will be impacted by coastal erosion in the long term with no intervention measures in place. Hopefully that helps break it down a little bit for you. Now, all of our reports utilize this NCERM from the EA and National Resources Wales. Coastal erosion, so you can find this either in the GeoRisk or the GeoRisk Plus reports, or in the new Vista. So reductions in value of between 10 and 25% have been reported once the risks of erosion have become known, and the reductions are expected to increase as the residual life of a property decreases. So many mortgage lenders require a residual life of 60 years. A property with a residual life of around 60 years may only be available to a reduced number of potential buyers, i.e. those who don't require a mortgage. So this would reduce demand for the property and is likely to result in a reduced price and difficulties getting a mortgage. So it is very, very much certainly an important thing to be aware of if you are near the coast, because it can impact property values greatly. So I'm sure your clients are already aware of this, and I'm sure it's something they think about. What other natural ground stability issues are there as well? So, I've mentioned natural ground stability already. You've got shrink swell, you've got movements, you've got things like sinkholes. Here, I'm going to say sorry again, because is it Ripon is a cathedral city in the borough of Harrogate in North Yorkshire. So it's got a long history of sinkholes and is the most susceptible area of sinkholes in the country. The first recorded sinkhole goes back to 1834, when 2 sheep fell into a hole and were with difficulty rescued with ropes. Now fenced off on the edge of farmland, the 1834 sinkhole is actually still visible with trees growing around the top. And of course, this area periodically still gets sinkholes. In the 1980s and 1990s, one was appearing every 2 or 3 years. So as the area is susceptible to these types of events, the British Geological Survey has created a 3D model to help planners select safe sites for homes. In 2019, plans to build a block of council homes were actually abandoned due to the geological risk and risk of sinkholes. And a major sinkhole saw 12 properties in the city evacuated after a deep hole appeared in 2016. In 2018, a supermarket was closed when a hole opened up at the back of the store. The council has fallen short of the government's annual target of 669 new homes, and the council has earmarked land for housing development within an area known as Zone C that is susceptible to sinkholes. Now, the 3D model is hopefully going to identify where the greatest uncertainty and risk of sinkholes is in the area. And the map that you see has the natural cavity dataset overlain on it. So it is an industry-recognized national database of natural cavities. The data draws upon a diverse range of published information, such as technical papers and caving guides, as well as unpublished information from the library and museum archives, academic studies, and consultant information. Now, this data is provided by Stantec and contains 75,000 recorded sinkhole incidents, the largest data set currently available. And this data is provided in point and polygon format. So a polygon, like the large area of orange that you see on the screen, indicates an area-based record, and that natural cavities are found somewhere within this area. Point data, however, identifies the estimated position of the sinkhole and is more precise in this case. Now, if the property has been identified to be in close proximity to a sinkhole or sinkholes, the report will, our reports will give additional information and provide recommendations which will be bespoke to the features identified within the report. So if on site or in close proximity, we would advise you to get a visual inspection done at the very least, certainly in these types of areas. So again, another type of thing that we report on and look into in addition to the non-coal mining. Now, the National Mining Instability Model is a tool that we use and we've developed, and we've used it for many, many years within mining instability reports. The model has been developed and refined over the last 40 years of reporting and investigating mining-related risk. The model now includes even more proprietary and third-party data to ensure a comprehensive assessment is provided for each individual property. So again, other things to consider, we're talking about mining, yes, we're talking about natural ground stability, yes, and in some cases, both can happen in the same place. They are not separate things. So it is worth bearing that in mind. Each mining feature and data point has been expertly restrained. This, combined with our experts and geologists' knowledge, investigation reports, and additional information from thousands of transactions, allows us to accurately assess ground stability and mining risk posed to each individual property. When each report is ordered, which may be off the back of one of our alerts or one of the alerts that your reseller uses, it goes through the National Mining and stability model to determine the risks to the property. Where risks are identified, then a specialist mining consultant will review all the data available for the property and the surrounding area to determine if there's risk. In many instances, we'll be able to issue a past report. Whilst some may not see the importance of a mining search if it is passed, you at least have the peace of mind that the report has been fully interpreted, which is where the value lies in knowing that your client's property isn't affected. Taking a quick look at what report options are available. So I'm going to go with kind of the easiest one, which is the Avista. So this is the all singing, all dancing single search that we now have, which combines full environmental plus a full mining solution. And when I say full mining, I know we didn't cover coal today, but it covers coal, non-coal, Cheshire brine, and ground stability, including natural ground stability issues, plus all the environmental, the typical environmental stuff that you would order. So contaminated land, flood, etc., etc. It's got everything you need in a single search. So in this case, we wouldn't ever recommend, like you wouldn't necessarily need to have any other search outside of this. So if you do happen to be in a high risk ground stability or mining area, this is a report for you just because it's everything in one. The only other thing you would really need outside of this would be if there was some type of on-site or visual inspection or a site survey that you would need to do. Now, due to the increased level of professional opinion, it goes to both our environmental consultancy team as well as our mining team. The turnaround time is between 24 and 48 hours if you happen to be in the unfortunate scenario where there is an environmental risk as well as a ground stability or mining risk as well. So it's really all singing, all dancing. There's a huge amount of information. I'm just kind of cycling through various iterations of the report. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not, because this is the old version of the report and we've changed it now to what you see on the screen. So there's a lot of changes that have happened to this report, primarily big design changes that are very, very much full of purpose and intent. So you'll notice we've removed the overall professional opinion on the front page and provide a opinion per result category. So that includes, like I say, every single major search that we've done, i.e. contaminated land, flood, coal, other mining, radon, etc., etc. We sort the results out into 3 separate outcomes. So you've got key results, which are always going to be floated at the top of the page. These are outcomes that require attention for from you, but also in some cases the lender and the homeowner where applicable. So these tend to be really big, big things like if there is a major coal mining issue, if there's a contaminated land or a flood issue, that tends to be the type of thing. Informatives or for information, these are results that a home buyer would want to know about, but it's not going to impact the search or delay the search too much. So there may be some ground stability issues highlighted, energy and infrastructure, in some cases planning constraints or planning applications if we've identified anything. And then the last section also searched is basically everything that's passed. It's everything you don't really need to worry about. So this front cover is fully dynamic, which means the results are going to be positioned based on their outcome and their significance. So anything important is always going to be at the very, very top of the page because that's what we want you to look at first because that requires your attention immediately. And then everything else follows in terms of importance. We've got the Groundsure IQ, which basically is there to help you manage your caseload. It's just there. It's an easy at-a-glance system to know which reports are going to require more of your attention and which pretty much are going to require minimal attention. And the other major change that we've had is that home buyer focused boilerplate. So basically, that tool is there to really speak to the homeowner. That is there to speak to the person buying the house to say, hey, Mr. House Buyer or Mrs. House Buyer, this report is really important. This report is for you and you need to read it. Effectively, when we were doing research to do these changes, one of the things that we were asked to do was anything we could do to help draw attention to the information in these reports would be really, really useful. And as such, Each Avista comes with a welcome to the neighborhood boilerplate, and it provides a clear indicator to the home buyer that this product is for them to read, and that the conveyancer has done them proud by ordering the most fully comprehensive search available. And the final design change, of course, is the icons. We've changed them so that they're really more informational. It's lovely to have cute photos and individual icons for each of the categories, but actually you want a tick or an eye or something that's flagging things up. So as much as possible, we're trying to make everything on the front page informative and useful for you. Outside of the Avista, you also have a georisk report. So if you don't want a single search like Avista, you are able to buy standalone mining and ground stability reports. We've got the georisk or the georisk plus, depending on what you want covered. So the georisk covers ground stability and non-coal mining. The georisk plus covers non-coal mining, ground stability plus coal plus Cheshire brine. So it really, there are options there. There are modular options there for you and your client, depending on what they want. And the solutions are there to be able to give you those options and that flexibility. So regardless of whether you buy a standalone report like a GeoRisk or GeoRisk Plus, or the Avista, which is the all-in-one, all of these reports utilize the same data and the same fantastic people and consultants and geologists, regardless of. So it really just depends on what you and your clients want to do. And as always, we are there to support you. We are there to support your clients. So all of the guidance and next steps are provided in the reports. But if you have a client that has a lot of technical questions, if you have a lot of technical questions regarding the report, you can speak to us and our consultants and our geologists. We are there to support them, and we are there to support you, and we are there to support your clients. So if you have any clients that are kind of making you want to rip your hair out because they have all these questions about what's in our reports, you can get them to speak to us directly, because we are the ones that wrote these reports. We are the ones that have done the risk assessments for these reports. You don't have to do that. And we want to take that responsibility off of you. So by all means, please, please, please make sure that you utilize the Groundsure customer services team. They can get you to speak to any of our consultants should you have a requirement to have any questions about any of our reports, regardless of whatever you choose. That is pretty much it for me today. I hope today's session has been useful, but if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out and we'll get these answered after today's session. And as always, we really appreciate your time and your feedback. So there will be a short feedback survey launching after this, and we'd really love it if you could take a few seconds to provide some feedback for us. Thanks very much, and have a great rest of the afternoon.